Welcome back. We are in episode 10 of our series, The World at the End of Your Driveway. And maybe, Jay, you can just give us a sort of a brief overview of where we are so far.
Yeah, well, we are just, obviously, this is, if you've been following along, this is kind of about mission.
Yep.
And the idea that there's so much of mission when it comes to just being able to speak or spread the gospel, as we've kind of called it throughout kind of the recent past anyway, that it's not that far. You don't have to go far to do that. It's just right at the end of your driveway.
Right at the end of your driveway.
And it really is about the mission of being a good and loving neighbor. And through that context, being able to share the gospel. And a lot of times, and the way we've been doing that is it's obviously there's times we've talked about telling the story and all that sort of stuff, but so much of it, as we kind of continue with this series, is really less about what we say and more about what we do and how we can show love.
Being present and interruptible.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've in our previous podcast, we covered some of the material from the Blessed book by Dave and John Ferguson. Yeah. And so today we're going to just kind of go over what we talked about before and then do the last part of that.
Yeah, we're going on over S.
Yes.
ESS.
Yeah, exactly. We did blah before.
We did blah already.
Okay, so so the book is based on their experience working in a church and as individuals with their families and effectively reaching their neighbors with the good news of Jesus. So the word bless is an acronym, and it's a B stands for begin with prayer, L stands for listen, E stands for eat, S. The first S is serve, and the second S is stories. And again, these aren't a checklist of things that we're looking to check off and say we've done that. These are more rhythms of life that happen, and they don't necessarily happen in that order. In helpful ways that we can interact with our neighbors. And so in the previous one, we did B for begin with prayer and L for listen. So let's pick it up there. The first letter is E. The E in bless stands for eat. We're going to eat with our neighbors.
That's right. We've kind of dedicated a whole podcast to creative hospitality, which a lot of this is covered in that. But yeah, this is the idea of just as simple as it is. It's inviting someone from your neighborhood over to your home for a meal. It's an act of generosity. It's something that definitely has probably changed, at least from what I've seen. This is something I think you saw a little more common in different communities to do this decades ago. But it's a lot less.
What are you looking at me for?
Because you're the only one in the room.
And I'm older than you. Anyway.
Yeah, I was avoiding that one.
Avoiding. That's okay. And I think eating a meal together does allow us to form a bond with people, and it just allows us to listen to their stories and allow them to ask us questions and us tell our stories. And it doesn't always work out, but it can be a catalyst for a friendship. So it's important to note that not everyone you invite over will become close friends with you, but some will. And so if we never invite someone, we can be sure that we will never make any friends that way. Yeah. And for some of us, it might be the only way we can connect with some people. They're never going to, if you invite them to church, they won't do that. But if you're in the neighborhood and you invite them to your house, they will come and do that. So I know in ancient times, having a meal with someone had much more significance than we necessarily
it was a big deal.
Put on it today. According to John and Dave in the book, eating with someone was an affirmation of a person's value, dignity, and worth. Who you ate with indicated who you loved and considered part of your social class.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a big deal. So we can see it through when we read all the Gospels, but definitely Luke is noted for really showing how Jesus would break down many social barriers at the time. And he would eat at a lot of varying tables. He would eat with his followers.
Yep.
But he would also eat with tax collectors and others marginalized by society. And then he would eat with the Pharisees, who would be the
religious elite of the day.
Yeah, who would be the popular sort of kind of in that culture at that time. Yeah. And a big deal to be able to do that. And those would have been considered the right people to be
exactly.
eating with.
Yeah. So I remember in one particular story when Jesus called Matthew, who was a tax collector, to follow him and be one of his disciples. It says that Matthew just got up and left his tax collector's booth and began to follow Jesus, which I'm sure was a bit of a stir in the community, both for the Jewish people and the Roman people. And then it's interesting to me that Jesus didn't enroll him in a discipleship class or challenge him to study the Torah. He went to his house for a meal.
Yeah. And
Jesus blessed Matthew and his tax collector friends by eating a meal with him. He blessed him with his presence. And this is, like you had mentioned, has been sort of a theme throughout our series.
Yeah.
In order to join Jesus in his missions, we have to do what he did and be present with people who don't follow Jesus.
Yeah. Author Henry Nouwen wrote about the power of eating together. He said this: when we invite friends for a meal, we do much more than offer them food for their bodies. We offer friendship, fellowship, good conversation, intimacy, and closeness. When we say, help yourself, take some more, don't be shy, have another glass, we offer our guests not only our food and drink, but also ourselves. Our spiritual bond grows and we become food and drink for one another.
Yeah, that's a great quote. It kind of summarizes the whole idea we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the first S in bless. That stands for serve. This practice often follows the first three. So we start off maybe praying for someone, and then you have an opportunity to interact with them and maybe eat a meal together and listen to their stories. And it's during that time we might find out that they have a specific need.
Yeah, and that's, I think, when we do the service is when we find that need, we can meet it. And it doesn't need to be anything big. It could be something like, again, like, hey, a little help from if they have a cold or flu.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like, hey, I can get you some tea or something like that.
Super, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Or something a little bit bigger when they go through some sort of troubles. Like maybe it's relational or laid off from a job. Just those things. It can be just such a wide range of different
and again,
things.
we would never know of those things unless we interacted with them in some way. And I think in those cases, it gives us an opportunity to show the love of Jesus by doing something to help them. And it could be something small, like, I know we've gotten a lot of snow in the last few days. I'm not sure when we're listening to this, but
when we recorded it, lots of snow.
Lots of snow. It's been snowing for days, it seems like. It could be something small, just like shoveling the snow from the sidewalk, or it could be something more significant, like being with someone while they process their anxiety or depression, or, like you said, a myriad of other things as well.
Yeah, well, and Jesus would show us a way that, because he was constantly serving people. That was kind of his thing. He talked about, I did not come to be served, I came to serve.
Yeah, and he would heal people.
Yep.
He would feed the hungry. He would rescue people from his followers from violent storms. I really like this next story because it's one of the most stunning ways that's ever been recorded in the gospel. It's from John chapter 3, where Jesus washes his disciples' feet. So the occasion is the last meal Jesus is having with his disciples. They don't know it yet, but it was a special celebratory meal called Passover, where the components of the meal were all very symbolic, and they were about the events of the escape of the nation of Israel from Egypt in the time of Moses. Now, some of his disciples were sent on ahead to prepare the meal, and when Jesus and the rest of the disciples arrive, it doesn't say it specifically in the gospel, but it seems like they had overlooked the idea of, or made preparations for who was going to actually wash their feet.
Right.
Because that was something that was
a big part of hospitality.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't know if this was an oversight of the disciples who prepared the meal, or if they were expecting Jesus to tell one of them to do it. John doesn't really say. So, and again, foot washing when entering a house was the cultural norm. And people mostly walked from place to place, and depending on what your social status was and how poor you were, you may not even have had sandals. So your feet got very dirty, and it was a farming culture, so we're not always sure what kind of stuff you're really going to be stepping in.
A lot of different things, yep.
So it could be a really gross job to wash somebody's feet. So that was usually left for someone who was the very lowest in the social order, usually a slave or a servant.
Well, and then also what that does is it set up the idea of that serving when we're doing it isn't about stature.
Yeah.
Like it's sometimes we've talked about this sort of thing and the idea of serving and that can really be like, I don't know what to say. It could be a badge, like, oh, he's a really good servant.
Yeah.
Which is good. And please do that. We're not saying don't do that if you're going to get a badge for it. Serving's it. But sometimes it's understanding, like, serving also means that thing that no one really wants to do.
Yeah.
And are we willing to do it? And
exactly.
we may not look wonderful or great or anything. Like it's the thing that nobody wants to do. Really.
Yeah. And a lot of it, I think, comes just in, it comes up at a specific time, and whoever is just willing to do it. Again, it's not always about stature, and sometimes, like you say, we do wear it as a badge of honor. I'm this high and mighty person, and I stoop to wash these people's
exactly.
feet. It makes
we're probably doing it for the wrong reasons.
Puffs me up. Definitely the wrong reasons. Where Jesus saw a need, and he chose to use it as a teaching session to his followers about what serving actually is.
And they were uncomfortable with him doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Excuse me. It says in John 13:3-5 that Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything, and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. Now, this is quite interesting. Jesus understands that he has been given all authority and power. So he really is the top authority and in the room. Even if the disciples don't quite get that yet, they still understand that he's a respected rabbi and that their positions are all lower than his. And he does the job that no one wants to do. And I would think that if word got out, it might even affect his reputation. And I think that's why Peter, in the book, it says that he tries to stop Jesus from washing his feet. And again, we don't know what his motivation is. It doesn't say, but I think he might have actually been trying to protect Jesus' reputation and said, you're not going to wash my feet. But Jesus convinces him to let him wash his feet. And I think he does it so that we understand that his mission, like you said earlier, is actually to serve humanity and to set an example for his followers to do the same. So in John 13, following on reading there, after washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, "Do you understand what it is I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. As I have given you an example to follow, do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth. Slaves are not greater than their master, nor is the messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now you know that these things, God will bless you for doing them." So Jesus is actually doing away with stature in the kingdom of heaven at that point. So,
and I think it's important as we to notice that it's doing away with stature, because the stature sometimes I think we can build up in this idea is that we think that service is supposed to be one direction, and it isn't. It's not just us serving them, which I think sometimes we can easily fall into. It's us as, again, Jesus followers don't always have to be the one serving. Some people might want to reciprocate. And that can really be a great at people feeling that we're on a kind of a same standing. So we're not kind of this elevated that, no, we don't need help, but we will help everyone. Which can be off-putting. And we have to realize that when we're not the ones that are ever needing any sort of help. And again, we're not talking about the biggest things in life, that letting your neighbor also shovel your snow, this walk on your snow. That's okay. They're kind of this back and forth thing, and it actually huge in developing relationship when we feel like we're doing stuff for each other.
I think if I remember right in the book, The Art of Neighboring by Jay Pathak and Dave Runyon, he talks about this very thing where there was a single mom in the neighborhood and they always go out of their way to help her. And one time they were working in their yard and she brought them bags of fertilizer or something, and they didn't want to accept it at first. And it realized that put them in a position of superiority, and it really did something for her to be able to reciprocate and help them. So I think it's very important that we don't use service as a way to gain stature.
Well, and there's power. I mean, Jesus recognized this, but there's power in asking for help.
Sure.
You know, when he sent out his disciples, you know, in their kind of first ministry tour, he was told them to take nothing with them, seek out people of peace and influence, and wherever they are, and accept their hospitality.
Yeah. Even ask for it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it allowed people to kind of participate in the whole mission.
Yeah.
And we are, it's that very much idea that we want people to participate in the relationship and not just be receiving of the relationship.
Yeah, so
it's not a relationship if it's only the one side
yeah.
kind of giving everything and the other just receiving it. I mean, obviously there's some, depending upon ability, affluence, time, whatever it might be, sometimes there might be a person doing a little bit more depending on all that sort of stuff, but it is a give and take. It's a relationship, and that's really important.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that Jesus sort of gives them that idea as the way to start the ministry.
Yeah.
Go into town, find someone that will offer you hospitality, which was more common in their culture, but then stay with them and develop a relationship with them, and they're actually helping you in the ministry. And it's not like you're the one coming to town with the good news and you're to be respected and whatever. You're actually just becoming part of the community while you're doing that. So I think that is a wonderful point that we don't always think about when we think about mission. Another one is the aspect of serving together. I know often the bonds of friendship and community are forged when people serve together for a noble cause. It can be neighbors coming together to help someone else in the neighborhood, or working together to build houses for the homeless in Habitat for Humanity.
Right.
I know that oftentimes in the past, people would go on mission trips and not necessarily they would invite friends that maybe didn't go to the church to go with them. And during the process of actually serving together, they were also more open to the gospel because they were working together for a common purpose. All right, let's move on to the second S in bless, and this stands for story. So all the letters of bless so far have been actions, and actions are important.
Yep.
We said that right at the top. Our actions demonstrate the love of Jesus in practical ways, and it helps people learn to trust us. But I think words and actions are not enough on their own. It opens the door, it gets the ball started, but eventually we're going to have to say something about the gospel. And I think to look at it from the perspective of the Holy Spirit, our actions sort of create the environment for and for the Holy Spirit to create opportunities for us to share our story.
And that's why it's really important that I think that this is the last of the letter of the word and all of that, just because I think often when it comes to mission, we've made this part here the most important part.
Yep.
And yes, it's important, but it's not the most important. In fact, what happens is anything, if this, to get this any kind of credibility, I think those other ones need to be in play.
Absolutely. And I think that's extremely important. So let's not gloss over that.
Yeah, and I also want to add is that, but let's make sure also that we don't make the other four, responding to the other four letters sort of just like a means to the story end. Yeah. It's just like, we're not really being authentic in the rest.
Yeah.
What makes the story, again, plausible, any of that is the other things are all truly authentic.
Yeah, and that's what we've been saying from the beginning. Yeah. We have to have a relationship. You're not really in a relationship with somebody unless you are authentic and there's give and take.
Absolutely.
So I think it's extremely important that we understand that we're not creating the opportunities, because oftentimes if we start with just telling our stories or even trying to preach the gospel to somebody, we said it, I think in one of the earlier ones, it can come off as offensive or trying to convert somebody, or again, no credibility, and at very minimum will just get ignored because it doesn't seem authentic.
Yeah.
All right. So again, Peter talks about this in 1 Peter 3:15, and he says, "And if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it, but do this in a gentle and respectful way." So again, Peter implies in the chapter, well, actually he says earlier in the chapter, that our actions, doing good, and words together are a witness to people who don't follow Jesus. And then notice how Peter says, if someone asks. So again, we're not out with an agenda trying to push it on somebody. But my experience is that once you actually become friends with someone, you learn about them, they learn about you. It's going to come up that you follow Jesus, you go to church, you do, in our case, we're pastors. That comes up early in conversations with us probably more than others because it's common to ask people what you do for a living.
Yes, built into the whole job description.
Exactly. So it's only a matter of time, I think, before they ask. So I think for me, I like to be prepared. So I think it's good to be prepared to tell a story. And again, we covered this in a message, or going to cover, so that it's important to, or I think about it in sort of three parts: who you were before you followed Jesus, how you came to follow Jesus, and what your life has been like since you started following Jesus. So let's look at each of those individually. Who you were before you followed Jesus. So what was your life like before you met Jesus? What motivated you back then? What lies did you believe that you know are lies now? And how were you hurt or damaged in any way? Or did you hurt others unintentionally or intentionally? Did you have any addictions, all those kind of things? I know, and for me, I grew up going to church, and so I grew up learning to just say and do all the right things.
Yeah.
But I think for us, it's important to think about our life before we got serious about following Jesus, because I know there was a time in my life where I certainly believed it as a child and even a teenager. But I think once I left home, it took me a while to really grasp faith for myself. And I think that is the part of my story that people could relate to.
That makes sense. Next, I let you move on to the idea of how you became a Jesus follower. This is the idea, maybe there were specific circumstances that affected your decision to follow Jesus, crisis, frustration, disillusion, whatever that might be. How did you hear about Jesus? Who did you interact with when you decided?
Yeah.
Were you alone? Were you with a friend? Home? Like just all of those aspects of where we were. And I mean, and I know this might be, like we kind of have a similar background in the idea that we kind of grew up in it. And I know for me, there's a difference between I think when I was a lot younger with that moment to ask, when I became a follower of Jesus, it's sort of like, well, I don't remember a time where I wasn't, but there are definitely times when I started to take what that was more seriously.
Yeah.
And the story can somewhat similar to when becoming a follower of Jesus, when that kind of became my decision as not just sort of what I grew up in.
Yeah, exactly.
And that could be how you share your story.
And the last part is your life since you started following Jesus. So what difference has Jesus made in your life? How has Jesus helped you through good times and hard times? We often focus on the hard times, but lots of times Jesus was right there with us through the good times as well. And I think just being honest about what we struggle with and yet still choose to follow Jesus really can mean something to people, because sometimes as Christians or followers of Jesus, we give the impression that nothing ever goes wrong, or we have it all together no matter what happens because of Jesus. And it's human to struggle.
Yeah. And I think it's just really important for everyone, the story. I know when I was younger, I always wanted the very dramatic story. You hear some people tell this dramatic story, and it's like my story wasn't dramatic. That doesn't mean it's not important, because truthfully, sometimes having a non-dramatic story it can be just really important to people to say, oh, it wasn't this you about to die and life changed around. It was just more like, you know what? more simple, more regular, more ordinary.
Yeah, exactly.
No one's going to make a movie about it. No one's going to write a book about it. Like it's just kind of.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that too is sharing how you're growing, particularly in the fruits of the Spirit. Yep. So I know for me, anger used to be an issue. Patience is still an issue. But I think I'm getting a little better at it. All those kind of things where you can see over a lifetime of following Jesus and practicing those practices. We talked about those in a previous series, how they affect your life and how you're growing in Christ. So just some final tips on telling your story. I know that lots of times we can just ask for God for help. Even in the moment, when something may come up unexpectedly, just pray for the right words to say. And always, like we've been saying, be authentic, be yourself. Don't, when you're thinking about your story and you may write it down to help you remember it, don't write it in the style of Shakespeare or something. Just be yourself. Yeah. Once people get to know you, they'll know if you're being authentic or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like you said, keep it real. Don't over dramatize it or even sugarcoat it. Tell it how it happened and how you were feeling, because people can relate to your feelings. I would say keep it short. Initially, I would say if you're sharing your story that way, 3 to 5 minutes is probably lots. Once people get to know you, once people have heard your story, something may resonate with them and they'll ask questions in the moment. Other times it may take weeks, months, even years before it comes up again, and people will ask you about your story. So again, just for me, I know it helps me to write down at least the bullet points of my story so I can remember them. And then if I read it out loud to myself, then I can, that doesn't sound like me or whatever. And then if you do it, read it several times, both to yourself and out loud, then it becomes something that you just practice until you don't really need to use the written page anymore.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of this video of the second part of going through bless. And just we'll do a quick rundown of it again. Bless, B means begin with prayer, L means listen, E means eat, S means serve, and the final S means story. And it really just gives us kind of a bit of a framework of how we can participate with Jesus on mission. There's definitely a lot more details and stories that can sort of maybe help with some of the principles in the book. So if that's something you like to do, please go and it's on Amazon. You can find it on there. It's called
and we'll
Bless.
put a link in the show.
We can put a link in there. And so just go back and look at that. And again, just, if you don't know where to start with B. Just start praying for your neighborhood.
Yep.
Just pray for people. Learn their names. That really help. Just start with that. Simple as that. Just start there, and that's great. Thank you once again for joining us. We will have a couple more left in this series, so please come back for that. Please like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you later.